Most business owners think that things feel out of control because they're not able to pay attention to everything that's going on, or they can't keep tabs of all of the activities in their company. So the tendency is to dial up their need to be involved in all the details, or to limit growth so it doesn't feel like things are running away from them. Both, of course, create a ceiling or a limitation to how much you can grow. Think about a high-end gourmet restaurant's kitchen. Some restaurants can produce quality, but only if the chef does everything and is involved in everything. Now, this may feel fancy, but it's going to be slow, and it's also going to be limited. You're only going to be able to serve a certain amount of meals in that kind of restaurant, and you'll only really be able to have that quality when that chef is there. So the chef can't take vacations, can't get sick, can't go away, ultimately can't sell the business. And so it's not, you maybe have a great meal, but it's not a great business. On the other hand, you have restaurants that produce equally high quality meals, and they can do it at volume. And they can do it consistently, the quality is consistent, and they can do it without any kind of chaos. And the chef or the main owner of the business doesn't have to be there all of the time for that to happen. In this video, I'll show you how to build your business like the second kind of restaurant. And I want to try to illustrate this in a way that doesn't cause you to feel like you have to fix everything all at once. All right, so most small and medium-sized businesses tend to fall into two major buckets. You have businesses that never really structure themselves well, and there's always this sense of chaos kind of at the border, and things are always kind of just on the edge of falling apart. Those businesses don't tend to grow very far or for very long because it requires so much hands-on effort to make things work. Then you have other businesses where the owner has, for whatever reason, just internally, they have a higher tolerance for complexity, and they can make it work for a little longer time or a little larger of a business, but it still tends to not grow much beyond that without the owner having to be there constantly. Most of the time, I would say there's a 3-10 rule, and this is just kind of a rule of thumb, but right around 3 employees, some people just can't get past that. Having to delegate out or give work to other people, it becomes too overwhelming. Then around 10 employees, then around 30 employees, then around 100 employees, it kind of keeps working its way up. And it's not 100% accurate, but it's a pretty reasonably accurate rubric for looking at different stages of growth and recognizing that most companies get stuck at one of those. And the shift for that is to not step up and get more involved or have to become a smarter owner of a business or leader of a business. The shift really is about building structure within the organization so that there's consistency, that people understand how to operate it and run it, even if you aren't there. And then that ultimately is what puts value into the business for at whatever point you might want to sell. And it gives you freedom now so that you can take vacations. You don't have to be there 60 hours a week. You can enjoy yourself and trust that the business is operating well and hopefully even growing in your absence. Signs that there is too much you in your business and not enough structure in the business is if you find that things are slipping unless you personally stay involved. Sales aren't happening, quality's not happening, you're not getting the kinds of customer relationships or experiences that you think should be there. Whatever the dynamics are that are relevant to your business, you notice that there's slippage. The quality standards or expectations that you have aren't being met unless you're there to make sure they happen. That's one of the big red flags. Not that you can't hire good people these days. That's how that's typically explained away. It's a red flag that you probably have not built the kind of structure that allows a decent hire to be able to perform to your expectations without having to be the best possible employee on the planet. The second thing is if you notice that the results vary significantly by individual or by person. This is a personality dependent business where and this is very common in small companies because you're working with the small team that you have. And when you're starting out, you may not have the best compensation packages. You might not have all of the bells and whistles that might attract people to a larger company. And so oftentimes you work with who you feel like you have to work with to get the business to go, or people that you feel loyal to. But you start to notice that that, oh, I can only give this job to this person because they're the only one who's going to be reliable enough to get that done. That is an inconsistency that makes it very hard to scale or to grow, because you can't count on just giving it to somebody who has a position title or a function. It's all personality dependent. And then if that person's not there, you run into problems. If there's chronic issues, mistakes, errors, problems, repeated problems that come up, if you feel like you've seen this story before, you're running around the track again, you want to begin to look at what's going on here systemically that either didn't prevent that, didn't mitigate that, or is actually causing it. Not everything is systemic, but in my experience, chronic issues are almost always due to a systemic dynamic or a cultural dynamic. There's a couple of exceptions, but it's mostly one of those two things. So again, if you're a leader of a company and you feel like, here we go again, here's this problem, what's the problem this Monday? Then that usually is a sign that you need to build or structure things differently, either how the structures are set up, which is what I'll talk about today, or the systems, or you'll want to begin to architect your culture differently than what you currently have. Now, this can feel overwhelming, this idea of building structure in an organization. Whenever I introduce, it is the answer. Incidentally, you don't have to like it, but this is the way. Like you have to accept it. You are not going to build a large, successful company that gives you freedom if you don't do this. And so dig deep down inside and just accept this as a truth. You have to do that. Just like you can't build a building if doesn't have a tall, big building without a solid foundation and a good framing, structural framing around it, and expect it to stand very long if you don't actually build it the way it needs to be built. It's the same thing with businesses and complexity. You have to have certain structures in place. But that can feel overwhelming. It can feel abstract. It can feel corporate, and we don't like that. It can feel impersonal. It can feel all kinds of things. And some people hesitate doing it or don't want to do it. Also, and I'll be honest about this, building the systems, building processes, building SOPs, building playbooks, whatever you want to call it, for most leaders, that's not the fun work. That's not what you wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm going to write 2, outlines for processes today. Most people don't wake up excited about doing something like that. There's a few who do, but not very many. And so I get that. I get that reality. But again, this is one of those deals where if you really want to build something that's you have to choose your hard or choose your discomfort. And if your preferred discomfort is waking up every Monday morning and wondering at what fell apart and feeling like you have to be there all day long for 16 hours to make it run, that's your preferred difficult thing you want to do, then knock yourself out. You can do that. But if you want to build a company that will operate well, then the hard that you need to choose, or the difficult thing, is okay, how do I start writing out the recipes, going back to my kitchen analogy, how do we start writing out the recipes for success? So that if we're going to do payroll, if we're going to do accounts payable, if we're going to do accounts receivable, there's steps lined out for how to do each of these things. If we're going to hire and onboard somebody, that they all have the same onboarding experience, that we know how to train everybody and bring them all into the company in the same way, so they all have the same sense of our values and our standards and our expectations. And I don't have to be the one to train every single person that comes in. So I need to write out what are the basic things that they need to know and be competent at and be introduced to, so that they can be successful in this space. How do you open a store? How do you clean something? How do you maintain safety? How do you, whatever the things are that are relevant for your industry or your business, there's a bunch of processes or systems or steps that, if they're outlined and defined and everybody understands what they are, they can self-manage towards them, and it becomes a record of your quality and your expectations, so that everybody can reference it and hit it together consistently. And it is what works. You can overbuild it and make it too complicated, but if you get it right or close enough to being right, then it will give you freedom, and it'll actually build a very healthy, robust, resilient business that can grow in your absence, which is fantastic. So things can get overbuilt. It's very rare in a small or medium-sized business for somebody to overbuild their systems. I have yet to see, a business doing $10 or $20 million a year that built so much structure that now it feels like this heavy, kind of mindless, personality-less corporation. That's something that evolves and requires usually a lot of attorneys and accountants and HR to complicate things. That's a whole other video series on how to not do that. But for a small, medium-sized business that's just It's one of those things that's just not likely to happen. You're not likely to build so much structure so quickly that it stifles all of the good stuff that's going on. It's not likely to become so complex. In fact, actually, complexity is one of the things that people get concerned about. And typically what happens is when you start writing out the recipes for how to do this, for how to, run payroll, what happens is it makes things easier. So you can hire somebody and they don't have to be an expert in that area. They can have enough qualifications, but here's the 12 steps that you go through to do this process. And it makes it easier to put people into that because you don't have to. It doesn't require so much knowledge coming in. It also allows you to go back and troubleshoot much more easily because you thought through and they've thought through or they can see it, the steps that are needed. And you can start to figure out where did something break down if something did break down. The other concern, and this does happen in small, medium-sized businesses, is you might build these systems and nobody uses them. And that happens. And so this requires leadership and it requires discipline and accountability. So you build it, you put it into place, and then you have to require people to use it. And again, how you do that has to do with culture. It's not usually that big of a deal. It's not as big of a deal in practice as it can be in people's minds. Basically, you just say, all right, if you have a retail store, my first business was a coffee shop. So here's the opening process. When you open the store, when you open the shop, these are the things that you need to do. Here's what you do with security, lights, the machine, here's what you set out, here's how you prepare the till, etc. And you can just line that out. It's not hard. You train people when you hire them to do that, and they usually just follow it. And it's not that hard to correct that. If you have somebody that doesn't want to do that, you can have a conversation around that. Here's the thing, is you don't have to build everything all at once. You don't need to produce an entire SOP, standard operating procedure, a manual all at once. You just need to figure out, I'm going to walk you through a process that makes this easier. Kind of that joke of how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. I'm going to help give you a sense of which bites to take first. When systems aren't clearly designed, people end up doing more work just to keep things from falling apart as opposed to growing. That's where burnout and inconsistency and risk starts to show up. If you want a clear way to diagnose whether your issues are structural, cultural, or both, I've included a simple assessment in the description that will walk you through how to do that. Also, I'd like to encourage you, if this is valuable for you, please like and subscribe. That helps me out, helps other people find these videos. There's three, let's call it waves, that you can think through. I think this makes it easier, is you want to think about now, what needs to happen now, what needs to happen next, and what can happen later. So these are three waves or phases of working on building systems or structure in your business. And the idea around now is this gives you immediate control around things that are important, like what feels like is getting out of control and it's going to be somehow damaging to our business. So that's what goes into your now bucket. This might be safety. This is usually stuff relating to money. This might have to do with things relating to customer experiences. Whatever is critical for your business, not just convenient, but critical for your business, goes into this now bucket because you need to get control over it. You need to manage that so you can sleep at night, so that you can actually run a business well. After this, next are things that are more about consistency. How do you make sure that you produce a consistent result? How do you make sure that things are always done the same way every day, each time, by every person that's there? So that's the next bucket. So this is not about the immediate issues that are about limiting mistakes, about reducing confusion, or making sure that execution actually happens. This is about making sure that there's repeatable outcomes, that nothing is dependent on one individual, the only person who knows how to do this, that the recipes are written and things can be produced the same way every single time. Then later, this has to do with optimization. So this is about how do we make things as good as we can? How do we get basic control? How do we get consistency? And then how do we make things as good as we can? Everybody wants to get down here, but the thing that keeps you up at night is usually up here. And so this is the first bucket of things. So this has to do with how do we increase speed? How do we increase margins? How do we increase the efficiency? How do we increase customer satisfaction? How do we increase employee morale? All of that kind of stuff fits here under optimization. So this is where I recommend that you start. Number one, start with the stuff that you need to do now, the areas that you need to get under control. So this can be as simple as defining basic roles and responsibilities. Who owns what? Who is responsible for what in your workplace? This is one of the most common challenges or problems in organizations, is that it's informally defined. Who is actually responsible for whatever the different things are? When it's informally defined, you tend to get breakages or leaks in terms of performance. You tend to get confusion. You tend to get conflict regarding who's in charge of things, whether or not things get done. It just creates problems. One of the simplest and easiest and fastest ways to begin to clean up your organization is to identify all the major buckets of responsibilities that are there and then define them or assign them to specific individuals. This is where you start to get the emergence of organizational charts or organograms, if you want to use fancy language. This is how you start to get the emergence of that, because it starts to show you who's if they're designed correctly. They'll show you who's responsible for what and how lines of authority work within the organization. You can create simple checklists for critical tasks. That's the second thing. So for example, my first business was a coffee shop. How do you open the business? How do you manage the till at the end of the day? How do you change tills when somebody else comes into work? How do you clean the kitchen so that you're maintaining safety standards? How do you do food and milk orders? All of those kinds of things can just be a list of basic steps of what you do, because you don't necessarily want the 18-year-old that you hired to all of a sudden get creative in terms of how they feel like they want to do it. And so what you want is consistency. And so just a simple checklist for, okay, what are the things that we need to get done during the day? How do we do that? One of the easiest ways to do this, incidentally, is to train somebody. So you bring somebody in, you explain it to them. I like the idea of recording it, have them take their phone, record you explaining it to them, and then have them write the steps out in the outline. That becomes a training exercise. Then they give it to you, you proof it to make sure it actually matches up what you want, and there you are, it's done. It took very little work on your part. You had to train them anyways, but now you've created something that allows you to have it set and established. Defined handoffs, I mentioned that. Visibility on top priorities. And so it was interesting. I walked into a coffee shop last week, and it's a very small coffee shop down in a suburb of Houston, Texas. But what was interesting to me is how when I walked in and when I walked out, staff always greeted me. They said hi to me. They wished me a good day. Now, it may be that they're just super polite down there, but I'm pretty sure that because of the consistency and just the way they were on it, that was training that they were given, that this was identified as a priority for the staff, because your average barista coming in isn't necessarily thinking, oh, I need to go say hi to the stranger that walked in the door or that's leaving. And so the fact that they did, and they all did it, every employee greeted me on the way in and on the way out. That's a training thing. And that had been because whoever owned or managed that business made that a priority and defined that for them. And that's a great thing. That's a great priority to establish. And it helps your employees understand what's important for you. The test, if you've got these things figured out, or if it's in the right bucket, is if we build this process, will it help prevent mistakes this week or this month? And if the answer is yes, then it probably fits into this bucket. The second bucket, which is consistency, number 2, my ink's drying out, is repeatability. So this has to do with defining processes for core workflows. So you want to make sure that certain things are written out. Now, you may have just the most brilliant bookkeeper or controller ever working there, and she just knows everything. She's super smart, super on it. Well, hopefully nothing ever happens to her, and she lives to be, 1,000, and she never goes away. That's not going to happen. And so what you want to be, and, hopefully she never takes a vacation in her life, and she just shows up to work. That's also not going to happen. You have a human being there. And so what you're going to want to do, and this gives you freedom, it gives her or him freedom, it allows things to work better. If the workflows I mentioned, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, for any other processes, producing financial reports, if this is all written down, then it makes it easier for somebody to step in and cover if that's needed, because it's not a mystery. There's not a proprietary system that's all in their head. I can tell you for sure that businesses, when there's an issue and somebody can't show up to work for any kind of reason, it can create a major, what should just be a minor inconvenience or an adjustment can become a major crisis if these things aren't written down. Standard expectations by role also fits in this area. Defining what does success look like? What does quality look like? This is one of those topics that is, I would say, most leaders don't really think about that much. They often will think about, this is not good enough, or I feel like people are missing my expectations, or they're not hitting quality expectations. But if you were to ask, and I know this because I do ask it, if I were to ask them, how will you know if those expectations have been met? They don't know how to define that. And it takes work in the conversation for them to come up with something that's measurable. And this is where you would use something like a SMART goal, if you're familiar with that. And you want to come up with things that are very specific, very measurable, so that you know, and that your customers, and that not your customers, your employees, everybody that's there, that's working there, knows what the expectation is and whether or not it's been hit or met. It's not based off of your mood that day. You want to have basic performance tracking. What does good performance look like in this area, and how do we track that so that we have ideally some leading indicators as well as lagging indicators? How do we know what high quality looks like, or the quality that you're looking for? Tracking your regular operating rhythm. How should things work on a regular basis? What's the cadence of work and accountability and meetings and productivity? How does it all work, and how is that recorded so that if somebody steps in, you're bringing in a new manager, they're not restructuring all of the cadence based off of their preferences. You figured out this is what works well in our company, and anybody coming in plays by the same sheet of music. The test for this is, can someone else step into that role and do it the same way? It's like a cookbook. Can someone else with just decent level skills follow the recipe and produce something that is basically the same meal? All right, so the last phase here is optimization. And this is where you're focusing on improvement. This is after you've done work in here. And incidentally, if you just get this one done, it's going to help you sleep at night. It's going to give you freedom. If you just do this one and this one, you're going to see dramatic improvements in your business. You might be so happy, you might even think, why do anything else? This is perfect. But you can go further if you choose. And this is optimization. This is where you're looking at the 12 steps for running payroll, and you think, you know what, I think we can skip a couple of those. Let's drop that down to 9 steps, and we can make that process, 15% faster, so it saves somebody a couple of hours every day. I was just talking to somebody that did that recently, and they took their payroll time and they shrunk it down. Their payroll, basically they're able to take about a day and a half of work out of payroll every pay period for the person that was running payroll, just because they started looking at how do we optimize this. And so that's huge, because you can begin, in their case, they were able to maintain a smaller team and not have to grow their team as much, their admin financial team, because people optimized it. So just reduce overall costs, which increases margins, helps businesses grow. So streamlining steps, automating repetitive work, especially with AI, figuring out where that might fit in an appropriate way in your business, or any other kind of automation tool. Is there repetitive work that doesn't really require somebody's eyes on, that we can somehow, or hire someone else to do it, like someone that delivers things for you, can they also stock it for you? Finding ways to make that easy for you to do. These things will help you improve your margins or your cycle times. This will remove friction in the organization. And so what you want to ask here is, are we improving something that already works? Does this prevent breakages? Does this allow consistency, allow anybody to step into that role and do it the same way? And does this make things better, faster, more efficient, more profitable? My encouragement is that you just work or pay attention to one wave at a time. How long should you spend working on this? Until you feel like you've made sufficient progress in that area and you can move up. It's okay to work on this for a while, feel like you've made progress, so then start working on this one and then realize we need to go back to here. That's okay. That's not a problem. It doesn't matter. But I would say spend a few months, 6 months, a year, getting this tied down, buttoned down pretty well. And then the next 6 months, next year, focused on this, and then so on. So again, to refer back to something I said earlier, you have to, if you want to grow and if you want freedom, you have to build structure in your business that other people can follow. You have to write the recipe book, so to speak, and so that things are consistent. When I started the coffee shop, we had defined recipes. So if somebody ordered a certain kind of latte, it was made exactly the same way at a certain temperature, certain kinds of milk, certain volume of milk, certain amount of syrup, not any amount that somebody wants to go in there. There were standards for all of it so that customers could order it and know that they're going to get the same thing every single time. It allowed us to bring in 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds and hire them and know that we're maintaining health standards and the safety standards back in the kitchen so that you're not spreading disease around or things aren't getting cleaned up, so that everything was done and maintained in an appropriate way. That was my big learning curve. I was 20 years old when I started that business, and I learned a lot about all of this, and writing out the procedures and processes for things is what started to produce freedom in that space and create consistency. In that business, I don't know that we ever got to optimization, but we were able to start working on these areas. So that's what I hope for you. That's what I want to offer you, is that the easiest way to work on this is in these buckets. Take one at a time, work on it for a period of time, and then when you feel like, okay, I think we've done enough in that area, then you can work on the next bucket. If you're not sure what belongs into each, just make a list of all of the basic roles and responsibilities that are out there. Make a list of what are all of the things that are done regularly that could be written down so that somebody else, the things that have to be explained to somebody. You don't have to make an exhaustive list, but just figure out which bucket do they go into and then start working on it. Hopefully that helps. When you approach building systems this way, something will shift. You'll stop trying to feel like you need to fix everything, and you'll be able to focus on getting control first. The business will feel stable, and you'll be able to actually put your energy into growth. Now, if this video has helped, the next step is to understand why some businesses still stall even after they've built structure. In the next video, I'll break down the scaling bottleneck that most owners run into and how you can handle it.